A warm welcome to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Inglis, as it's probably around 7:30 a.m. in your part of the world, and we thank you deeply for taking the time for this talk. Dr. Inglis's talk today is complementary to an exhibition he has curated at DakshinaChitra Museum titled Kovilpatti, the Town That Papered India. Let me first give you a brief introduction to Dr. Stephen Inglis. Dr. Inglis studied anthropology and museology at the University of British Columbia, at Madurai Kamaraj University in Madurai, and at Calcutta University, concluding with a PhD from the UBC in 1984. His field research was undertaken over several years in the late 70s and early 80s with the Tamil potter priests. He had a long career at Canada's National Ethnology and History Museum. He worked there as a researcher and curator in ethnology, fine craft, and folk craft before assuming the role of Director General. In this position, Dr. Inglis was responsible for leading Canada's largest research and collections department with holdings of over 3 million artifacts and a professional staff of 130. During his 25-year tenure at the museum, he led the expansion of the international reputation of the institution, its scholars and exhibitions. He curated 10 major exhibitions, notably a survey of Indian art, India, the Living Arts in 2000 at the Canadian Museum of Civilization, Maharaja in 2010 at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and the Permanent South Asia Collections in 2011 at the UBC Museum of Anthropology. He is currently an adjunct researcher of art history at Carleton University, where he teaches curatorial studies in Asian art. There, he has helped develop a graduate program in curatorial studies. He's been honored for his innovation in museology with awards from the Canadian Museums Association, the Hans Manneby Foundation of Sweden, the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, and the President of India. Today's talk is titled Filling Gaps in the Art of India, where Dr. Inglis will help us understand the influence of a tiny town called Kovilpatti in Tamil Nadu and a small band of artists in the area of popular art. And as he says, the ways in which it influenced the ways in which Indians visualize their deities, their politicians, and their celebrities. So it's truly a tiny town, but with a national impact. A small band of artists, but again with a national impact. So now over to you, Dr. Inglis.
Thank you, Anita. And I thank all of you for showing up this evening for my talk. Of course, I couldn't be here without the people of DakshinaChitra and several people from Kovilpatti who have really made a terrific contribution to this exhibition and to, I would say, filling in the history of the popular arts in the 20th century. I think I'll begin right away with an image, which is a little bit cheeky, but I wanted to just say what kind of gaps I'm talking about. The art history of India, of course, is vast, and it's something that people have worked on for a very long time. But I'm showing you this just to say that the work of artists like M.F. Hussain on the left of your screen, with his depiction of Lakshmi, and on the right, a depiction of Lakshmi by one of the Kovilpatti artists, sets up a kind of a contrast in the study of the art of India, because M.F. Hussain is considered the greatest artist of the 20th century in India. And the Kovilpatti group are really not well known. So I want to talk tonight a little bit about how I feel the popular arts, the arts for everyday people, help to us to understand contemporary art and also fill in some gaps where we don't know who made these paintings and these pictures and how they did it. I'm going to focus a little bit tonight on what the influences were on the popular artists for popular printing. It's a very complex history. It's not a very simple thing at all. And I think it's important for us. And what we've tried to do in the exhibit is to bring in some of the influences and the inspirations of popular artists. And we're focusing tonight around the work and the community gathered together by C. Kondairaju. As you know, probably by now, he was, in a sense, the guru of this group, starting in the early 20th century and right into the 70s. And he was the tutor and the inspirer of a large group of artists that worked in that small place. So it's the 125th anniversary of his birth today. And I think the small group that is listening to this talk tonight, and our friends in Chitralayam in Chennai in particular, your big group, we know of this man's history, but very few other people in India do. And I think it's important for DakshinaChitra and for anyone who loves the art of India to become more familiar with this figure. Now, this is a typical kind of photograph that one sees of a group. This was very much a commune, a communal group of artists. And here's what Mr. Jayakumar, who's the son of Ramalingam, called the senior batch. These are the older men who joined with Kondairaju in Kovilpati to begin their work. First as drama scene painters, then as backdrop painters, then as painters for the big printing companies in Shivakasi. Now, this is the key to both my talk tonight and to our understanding of that group of artists, which it's a kind of a genealogy. You see on the left there, the senior batch of artists, all of whom we have work from, the junior batch to the right, who started a little later, and then a whole group of co-workers and assistants at the bottom who assisted with this work. So it's not an insignificant number of people. It's quite a group. And along with many other artists in other parts of India, they really produced the style and the volume of work that we know now as the 20th century. I wanted to just say that this kind of work, large-scale printing for public use, started at the turn of the 20th century and really ended toward the end of the 20th century. So I'll get to that in a little more detail in a moment. Now, for those of you who are not from Tamilnadu, I just wanted to indicate that where we're in Tamilnadu in the first map in India, and the second map is of Tamilnadu, and I'm showing you the district in which Kovilpati is located at the very south of Tamilnadu, and then the district, then a little more of the area within the district where we find Kovilpati. Now, here's our first look at some of the first work coming out of the Devi Art Studio, which was founded by the founding members of the Kovilpati group. This is a scheme of background of paintings that were available. And these were sold to photo studios throughout India, even up to Kashmir, where a studio would buy a backdrop of a natural scene or an indoor scene, which they could use as backdrop for the photos they were taking. And I just wanted to throw this in. This isn't members of the Kovalpati group. This is a painter and his group called Subayar, who worked in Madurai in the 1980s and 70s. And I think he is one of the last drama scene painters still working, or was at the time. He's actually no more. And this is in a studio right near the Meenakshi temple. And you can see in the background, it's kind of an interesting photo because it shows how pictures, photographs, and different mementos were framed in the walls of these studios. And they represent quite an interesting gathering of visual information, which stays on the wall while the work is going on. And here is the group, Subayar and his son and his assistants, with one of the big backdrops that they produced for special dramas. These are dramas that often called boys' companies that went around in Tamil Nadu and to Sri Lanka and to other places in the early 20th century, doing well-known stories from Hindu epics and from local stories as well. And this was the tradition that the Kovalpati artists grew out of, because as some of you are aware, most of the senior batch of Kovalpati artists worked for these drama companies earlier on in their career. And they knew the tradition of painting these backdrops. That's how they gained the skill necessary to make it a business. And one influence, very important to Kovalpati artists, was temple painting, because this was, of course, one of the traditions of Tamil Nadu. And this is a temple painter, just a photograph from inside the Meenakshi temple of a group of painters. Their community is Nadu, and they've worked for generations in redoing and updating the paintings, the hundreds and hundreds of paintings along the walls of the Meenakshi Sundareshwara temple. And I was able to talk with these people. They really begin at one end of the temple and work towards the other end. And they're working for years and years to redo these paintings. And by the time they finish, they have to start again at the beginning, because the paintings that they originally did are starting to wear at that point. Now, here's one of the earliest images that I'm aware of, shared with me, of Kande Raju's work. So he already had a notion of how the goddess should be represented, and this is obviously a advertisement. And so it's nice to have this very early work, because most of the rest of the work from the Kovalpati group comes from his students. And this is another one. I just like this image because it's Krishna and Radha, it's a Muslim trading company, it's the Hindu temple behind, and then what I believe is Telugu up above, and just a chance to show the variety of influences and interests in the early, very early advertising art industry. And Kande Raju signed his name to this particular early piece. Now, there's myself 40 years ago So I wish I looked like that now, but I'm an old man, and here I'm sitting with M. Ramalingam, one of the greatest artists of the Kovalpati group. And you notice that he seated himself, this is in about 1980, he seated himself beneath a photograph of his guru, Kondaraju. This is important to me because there were certain traditional elements to the Kovalpati group, in the sense that a group of artists that gather often have a member who is inspiring to the other groups. And I think Kondaraju was this kind of person. He acted almost as a guru in some ways to the younger artists, helping them out, showing them which direction to go in. And he's honored in that regard by his group. There's a lot of traditional Indian thinking in that way of constructing an art group. And what this meant was that it's often difficult to tell whether Kondaraju himself worked on a piece or one of his students, because quite often, early on in their careers, the artist would sign his name to their work, and then later on, both their names to the work. And then as an artist like Ramalingam, who became really a solid base amongst the artists, he would sign his own name eventually and his studio's name. So this was a way of acknowledging the master, as it were. Now, this is a photograph I took in the 80s of Ramalingam's puja room. And I wanted to show you this just because of the variety of content here. This is the goddess of Kovalpati above, painted by Ramalingam. Then below, painting of Vinayakar or Ganapati, which Ramalingam told me had been painted by Kondaraju. And then on either side, framed prints of work by Raja Ravi Varma, his Lakshmi and his Saraswati, two of the most famous popular images, printed images in the history of popular art. And so it just shows some of the influences on his work and some of the veneration that's given to Varma by most popular artists in India. Now, I put this together just because on the right you have an image by Ramalingam. It's an interesting image because it combines Buddhism and a beautiful Tamil actress. And on the left is an image from Italy from the turn of the 20th century of a beauty, an Edwardian beauty. And the image on the left I found in a pile of prints, old prints, in one of the artist studios. So it shows that even early in the 20th century, the artists, popular artists of South India, had access to some European examples of early printed material. And it's an interesting vein that runs through. And it also is typical in some ways of the popular arts, this kind of sharing and inspiration back and forth, much less concern about that than with most contemporary artists. So it's part of the process that you take in inspiration and adapt it to your own work. Here's another Ramalingam advertising poster for a soft drink company, and another beautiful actress listening to Krishna playing his flute. So this was part of the power of these kinds of images, is they combined a sort of a cinema interest with a religious interest. And of course, in Tamil Nadu, it wasn't unusual to have a politician who is also an actress and also a religious person. And the variety of attractiveness to the general public was enforced and even made more attractive by this kind of combination of ideas. Now, here's another artist. I love this photograph. This is Subaya, another very important artist in the Kovalpati group. And this is him probably in about 1946. I think Mr. Mariswaran guessed at this date, sitting on one of the photo backdrops that must have been popular. You can see the stars in the background, and someone might sit, just like Subaya's here, in the studio on this moon as a photo shoot. And just to, again, go into the hybridization of Indian art in the popular vein, here's Gandhi with Buddha and Jesus and Rama all in the same painting. And this was the kind of thing that the popular artists could do, innovating, in a sense, on the older separate views of religious traditions, and appealing to the idea that maybe somebody like Gandhi, a politician or a leader of some kind, was open to the variety of religious traditions that became modern India. And I'm just throwing this one in, a photograph I took in early on in the 80s, just showing this kind of tension, I would say, between the female form as goddess and the female form as kind of an attractive temptress. And these two are going on simultaneously, sometimes in the same painting, but certainly in two different directions that might appeal to some kind of person who was selecting a calendar and not to another. And so the ones on the right, the images on the right may be used by small industries and so forth. The ones on the left, most often in the big sweet shops and the big jewelry shops and so forth, to represent their devout feelings for the Hindu deities. And along with the prints of for calendars, for cinema and so forth, Sivakasi, which is quite close to Kovalpati, became a place renowned for printing. And here's just an example of the fireworks posters that are done usually each year in the fall. And these drew on the style of the Kovalpati group and a number of other groups. I just wanted to say that the Kovalpati group is typical of groups of artists who worked in the 20th century. There's many others in other parts of India, including, for example, most famously maybe the painters of Nathdwara, who worked for the printers in Mumbai and Bombay, and then other individuals in North India and West India and so forth. And of course, in Tamil Nadu too, there were other artists that weren't part of the Kovalpati group, but other really renowned popular artists. I worked a little bit with S. Ravi, with Murugakani. They were both in Sivakasi at the time, and with people like just a whole range, K. Madhavan, who I studied his biography and his tradition. So all these various artists contributed to what was being printed in Sivakasi, but the Kovilpati group were the closest and largest generator of these images. And then just one other little printing issue, along with fireworks and matches, and all the other printing, these little matchboxes, this one particularly beautiful and tiny, were other forms in which the images of the popular artists were distributed. So along with the calendar art, there's also, of course, keychains, book covers, and these images back and forth between different forms, and formed a kind of a huge paper industry used for practical projects, as well as for people's homes. One way that I became interested in this, I was working with traditional potters in Madurai and Ramnad district, and I noticed every house that I visited, every home, every school, every business had calendar prints, framed or not framed. And I wondered who's making these? Who made these images? Where were they generated? There's a sort of a common practice when you look at something that's printed, you think, oh, well, maybe that was just, I don't know, made technically or something. So the actual biography of the artist, the work that went into it, is not so often appreciated. And I felt I'd like to find out who these are. And many of the potters that I was working with, they knew who these artists were. And when they saw the signature on the print, they realized this was somebody they knew. And so it was actually one of my closest potter associates who took me down to Kovilpati and introduced me to the artists first, because the potters revered these artists. They knew how popular they were and how important, what an impression they made on the public. I just wanted to show you this as classical, beautiful image of Meenakshi by Subaya. And I just show you another of Ramalingam from his most appreciated period in the 50s and 60s. Here's Murugan, always the younger Murugan in the south with his veil and his peacock. There's a Gopuram in the background, one of Murugan's sacred places, Palani, I think this is, and his mother and father, Shiva and Parvati, looking lovingly down on him. Some people have called this version of Shiva, an American friend of mine, the Elizabeth Taylor form of Shiva. But in any case, what this is something that combines the interest of the local people at the time, their love of Murugan, their honor of the sacred places where one can visit on pilgrimage, the family, the grouping. These are all things that appeal to ordinary people in the 20th century and sort of made people interested in cutting the image off the calendar or taking the calendar block off the bottom at the end of the year and maybe framing that painting to act as a shrine in their own home. And I liked a comment that I heard from the roundtable discussion that happened last week from a gentleman by the name of Gandhi Balasubramaniam. He said that there was a certain democratization to the worship of God through images and these kinds of popular images. And in a sense, the gods came home. I like that because I think that's exactly what was happening. It enabled people to worship in their own homes deities who may be distant or maybe they didn't feel comfortable with in the temple setting. And as a consequence of that, these images and these paper images became a primary form of worship. And in any collection you see of the old prints, there's likely to be little burns from the incense that was burning underneath them, or they've been honored with putu on the forehead. So, and my final slide in this little presentation is a photograph I took in the early 2000s. I think 2009, this photograph of Srinivasan, who was the last of the senior batch left living in early 2000. And I met him in his studio in Kolapati, and he was painting beautiful painted images on the same size as previously went to Sivakasi for printing. Very detailed and beautifully done, with that sense of the beauty of jewelry and of light and shade, and in a kind of a worshipful pose. But he wasn't sending these to Sivakasi because there wasn't the attraction. There wasn't the market for them anymore. And he was really just painting these for himself and as a memory of his work during his lifetime. For those of you who aren't aware of Sivakasi, there was at one time at their height, there was over 400 major presses working in that city, over 1,000 letterpress units at the same time. It was the major printing hub in India. And the numbers of pieces that were being in 1979, 400 photo offset machines and 1,000 litho and letterpress units in operation. And the Kolapati artists, Runnelingham, for example, probably did 1,600 paintings during the 3 decades of his most important period. Subaya, probably more like 1,200. And these were printed in runs of thousands, and in some cases, tens of thousands, and resulted in millions of images printed and passed around the world. Because they not only were popular in Tamilnadu, but also in the rest of India and in all the cities around the world where Indians have settled. And I wanted to show this photograph as well because of one last influence along with the European prints, along with the drama backdrops, along with the temple painting. These are the complexities of the influences that went into this style. And behind, you see a Tanjore style painting. And it helps us to recall that Kande Raju was a Raju, a group of people that included skilled painters that were brought down to the Tamil kingdoms from Andhra and other places, and whose tradition was painting some of the first kind of framed paintings that were used in prayer halls and personal residences all through Tamilnadu. So I would just like to do one thing at this point, and that is to I also wanted to mention one other thing I'm forgetting, which is that C. Kandai Raju, along with his background as from a painter family, also attended the Madras College of Art and did very well there. And so brought with him a number of other skills that included the study of ancient Indian art and also some European art history as well. Now, it's important for me to acknowledge the work of Jayakumar Ramalingam and S. Mariswaran and their relatives in Kovapati, who have made the objects that are in the exhibition available. And we've worked very closely with them and appreciate their contributions. I'd also like to thank Anita Patamkulam, who is the culture coordinator at DakshinaChitra and who did a lot of work, Geeta Hudson also, and I'm sure many others at DakshinaChitra, which is really a community of museum people who cooperate and support one another. I'd also like to give my special greetings and my thanks to Dr. Deborah Tyagarajan, who was the founder of DakshinaChitra. And she was the one who opened the door to the study of popular art at DakshinaChitra and did it a long time ago. She realized that one of the gaps in our consideration of Indian art was this period of time when the popular paper revolution was going on in India in the 20th century. And so with that, I thank you for your attention. I hope you'll have a chance to see the exhibition if you're in Tamil Nadu. And if not, there'll probably be some photographic and video documentation that we'll all be able to access. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Inglis, for really taking us through and contextualizing this this period of art that had an influence across India. We're now, maybe I'll start with a couple of questions, after which we'll open it up for participants. The first question, I remember, when growing up and we always heard of it as, people also refer to this as Sivakasi art from Sivakasi. It's very clearly referring to it as Kovilpatti art. Could you tell us why you so clearly the nomenclature is Kovilpatti art?
Well, as some of you know, Kovilpatti almost unexpectedly became a center for this kind of artwork because at a certain point, the companies that Kande Raju and others were working with, drama companies, kind of collapsed. And they were taken over by the radio and by the cinema and by other forms of entertainment, local entertainment. And my understanding is that at a certain point, one of the big companies that these gentlemen were working for sort of broke down and maybe went bankrupt, I don't know, but they were near Kovilpati, and they just decided to put their roots down there. And various people who had been colleagues of Kande Raju joined him there. And this is how this large group became centered in Kovilpati. I can see why they called it Sivakasi art, because that encompasses a large percentage of the artists that were working for that field. But Kovilpati became the center for the production of the paintings that went to Sivakasi. And during the early period, I'm not, hopefully Jayakumar and Marisam will correct me if I'm mistaken, but when they first got to Kovilpati, they did anything they could. They painted metal trunks, they did all kinds of things that could make them some money until they could establish themselves in other fields, for example, the photo studios that they set up. And from there, they worked out into the print industry in a big way.
Another thing that we definitely see is that, Ravi Varma's oeuvre has received a great deal of scholarly attention. Each period there's someone new studying it and understanding its impact, whereas this has received relatively less. To what do you attribute this overlooking of this band of artists?
Well, I think that Raja Ravi Varma was a real innovator. The other thing is that his work started he was working for the elite rather than for everyday art. When he began, he was a portraitist, and he went from kingdom to kingdom painting people. And, he did a lot of oil paintings of important people and rajas and so forth. And so his name became famous in this way. He also, as you probably know, Anita, set up what was one of the first lithoprinting units in Mumbai very early by importing machines from Europe. And so he had a kind of a position within the early 20th century arts, which was quite unique. And the Kovilpati group came on a little bit later, after Ravi Varma had already established his position. And I think Ravi Varma was kind of a personality, and he was one that was associated with the British and with the ruling parties and classes. And that's probably why he also made some innovations. This painting of Puranic stories and so forth, which hadn't been a big part of Indian art up to that time, he innovated with. So those are some of the reasons. You're right, there's been a lot of publications and writing, and most famous artist in the history of India and so forth applied to Ravi Varma. But of course, he was just one of the early artists contributing to 20th century interest in popular painting.
I'll read out a couple of questions that have come from the participants. One from Harini. She's asked if technology today has enhanced the creative space or otherwise. It's a general question. And another from Visalakshi Ramaswamy, who asks, what is the future plan to continue this tradition? I know it's a very difficult question to answer, but that's a question.
Well, from my experience, it does seem like this original painting for printing is a sort of a system that's more or less fallen apart. As you may know, the printers, the big ones, Coronation, and these big litho companies in Sivakasi, they purchased the original artwork from the artists to a large extent. Luckily, the descendants of those artists have been able to gather quite a collection of original paintings, but most of the paintings, like the one that Srinivasan is working on in my last slide, most of those went to the printers. And then the printers had retouchers on staff, painters who would take the backgrounds and change the color, add another figure to the painting and so forth, so that it could be reprinted again. And finally, as the digital age came upon us, these printers had all the paintings they needed, along with photography and other forms of popular imagery. They didn't need the artists anymore, to a large extent. So this big production more or less came to the end. The other thing that happened was people didn't need calendars anymore. As soon as the cell phone came into use, the calendar became a kind of an anachronism. You might still hang it on your wall, but it didn't have the functional use that it used to. So I don't see a big future in this. I think the era of the papering of India, as I called the exhibit, is over. However, I think learning about the traditions of these artists and what went into that huge image world of the 20th century is an important part of Indian art history. And I think its future is to become better known and better appreciated within the full realm of Indian art.
Thank you for that, because you've also sort of, said that when something is over, it's over, but it's still very important for us to learn, appreciate, understand all the nuances of everything. There's a question from Deborah Tyagarajan. Did the younger members of the group have anything to do with the huge film posters which were so popular at the end of the 20th century?
Yes, they did. Many of the Kovilpati artists did film poster work. Not so much as some of the others in other parts of the state, but yes, for sure they did. And as those of you who are Tamil know, quite often these posters for cinemas were very important to the attraction of the film. And sometimes a poster would be put up partially, and then the painter would come overnight and paint another part of it. And then, there were a whole range of different uses for these images. But as I've said, if you look at the more contemporary film advertising, it's almost all photographic. And the digital age has not been kind to these creative traditions. And as a result, I'm sure some people who were painting are doing other things now. And we're just kind of appreciating now, to a larger extent, what happened to paper India with these wonderful images and all the uses to which they were put. One of which, as I've argued, is that through the work of these artists, these were the images through which ordinary people visualized their gods and visualized their politicians and visualized their movie stars. So it was the poses, the colors, the representation that these artists did, which gave people a visual contact and a visual image to help set up their version of the world. And I think that's perhaps the greatest legacy of this artistic tradition.
And we must not forget that it's most apt today that we've had the talk today, because today is the 125th birth anniversary of Kondai Raju. So,
yes. And isn't that lovely, Anita,
yes,
that we can celebrate
yes,
someone who was so influential during his time, and yet very few Indians have ever heard his name.
yes.
And, as a consequence of that, I think it is filling in gaps in the tradition of Indian art.
So I think we've come to the end. I don't know whether Jaykumar and group maybe are just soaking in what you have said. There were a couple of questions that probably came from some of them. So thank you very much, Dr. Inglis, for this talk. And thank you for filling in the gaps. And it's also very heartening for us to be able to do it on the 125th birth anniversary of Kondai Raju. Thank you all for tuning in today. And please catch us at our next DC Museum Talks. Good night.
Anita?
Yes?
Yeah. Could I say one more thing?
Oh, please do.
I just wanted on the 125th anniversary of Kondai Raju to say thank you to the people at Chitralayam. This is an art gallery in Chennai, which looks at the work and legacy of these important artists. And I'd just like to acknowledge the fact that this work is going on, and it's a younger generation which is appreciating and gathering and distributing the work of their elders. Thank you.
Yes, and I must add, Dr. Inglis, that it is standing room only at the Chitralayam Gallery today. I hear that the gallery is full and people are standing outside and listening to the talk now. So I mean, the younger generation.
So much.
Younger generation.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, they're very aware that they have to safeguard and keep these legacies and these narratives and these stories alive. Thank you so much, Dr. Inglis, and
okay.
we hope to see you in Chennai for a physical talk.